What's up YouTube? Lambo here, and today I will talk about a couple of personal topics, and this will be a swift video where I'll answer some questions that I'm sure a lot of you guys have. Now the first thing is that some of you might wonder, especially the ones that don't watch my stream or that don't really follow my Patreon content or that are not in my Discord, etc., is that if I'm retiring. Some people even think that I'm already retired, which is not true. I purposefully didn't make the title of this video, Am I Retired or Am I Retiring? Even though that would have gained a lot more views simply because I didn't want to clickbait and I didn't want to play with anyone's emotions. So instead, I'll talk about why I am, for example, not shown on ALIGULAC anymore. Usually I'm around rank 20, sometimes a little bit higher, sometimes a little bit lower. Usually I'm around rank 20 on ALIGULAC, and the reason I'm not there is because I haven't played any tournament games, and that's why I'm not showing up on the ALIGULAC page. Due to Lambo's lack of recent games, they have been marked as inactive and removed from the current rating list. Once I play a rated game, they will be stated. So the moment I play again, I will be shown on that page once again. And the reason for me not playing any tournament games is quite simple, is because there are no tournaments. And then you might be wondering, but there's a lot of online tournaments. I hate playing online tournaments, and that would be the second part of the video for where I talk about why I don't like playing in the weeklies or any other online tournaments for that matter. That's a personal thing that I've always disliked for quite a while now. And yeah, but for the first matter, why am I not playing as much is because there are no big tournaments, and usually that is the most important thing. It's the thing that fuels me and that gives me the biggest portion of motivation that I have for this game. I love playing StarCraft and it is fun, but the extra motivation I always get from the offline events. I I have no problems practicing the entire day in custom games and doing the same matchup and the same thing over and over again if it is for the purpose of trying to prove myself in an offline environment or at the very least in an important tournament. So in all of these international, especially events where we play in front of a crowd, can be online or offline. Offline is a bonus, but this is what fuels me and what gives me extra motivation. This is also partly why I struggled a bunch in the last season. Is because I didn't qualify for many events, and I don't get as motivated for the qualifiers as I do for the real events, even though the qualifiers are necessary for me to get into the real events. And I've usually, with normal practice and normal amounts of practice, I always manage to qualify for stuff like Katowice because I am one of the top 24 players. And in the last 2 years, which was the last season, I failed to qualify for Gamers 8, I failed to qualify for Katowice, and then I also failed to qualify for EWC. And that type of stuff also hurts the amount that I practice, because then I don't practice for all these events, whereas everybody else who is qualified for them practices, and I really take some time off. And yeah, I just lost in the last season, but if you guys want, I can make an entire video about my last season if you guys are interested in why things went right and why things went wrong. But I lost against players that I usually don't lose, like against Spirit or Kalazur. I think I even lost in the Katowice qualifiers, and then that also gave me less of a motivation because then I couldn't play in big important events. An extra thing that also hindered my motivation is because even though I go to an event always thinking about winning the entire thing, like I am envisioning playing in front of a crowd, I do want to win this trophy no matter how realistic it is or not. Another thing that changed last season is that they gave the economy bracket, and I didn't make it to the premium bracket a single time, which is top 4 in Europe, which is very difficult. But the stuff that I practice for the most is not the European portion. Once again, it is for the offline premier event, and for that I usually practice a shit ton. And I also practice a lot for the last year's offline events. In the 2 offline events, I got top 12, and in one I got top 24, which is honestly not a bad result at all. Those are not bad results, but it is simply very, very unlikely for me to make it all the way from an economy bracket. It would be for anyone to make it all the way from the economy bracket to the round of 8 and then play for the big bucks. So that also hindered my motivation a little bit because I disliked the format. I would have rather had it be a little bit more open, but I was already open about that. So yeah, overall my motivation hasn't been that big. That is because and that is the reason why you haven't seen me playing a lot. But the main reason is that there are no big events right now. And we don't know if there will be more. I hope there will be. I think there will be, but I don't know more than you guys do. I don't know anything concrete. And I'm still playing a little bit of StarCraft, but there is simply no reason for me to play a lot. I'm now getting into the groove of things again. I want to get better again, simply because I think there will be, or in the hopes that there will be big events, and I need to already get my mechanics on a level to be ready for those events and also to be ready for these potential qualifiers. So yeah, that's why you don't see me, is because there are none of these events. that's a very simple reason. And then the stuff that all the others are playing in, not all the others, but most others, are online tournaments. And now I can go over a couple of reasons why I don't play in these small online cups that you see every week. So the first reason, and this is probably the biggest reason for me personally, is the time that I have to invest into these online cups for the money returned. It simply is not a sensible investment for return ratio. Like if I do a normal job, I would get paid way more. And obviously, I'm doing something that I should be enjoying, but I don't enjoy these online caps. But I'll go over a couple of more reasons as to why I don't enjoy them to begin with. But let's say I'm signing up to any of the tournaments. The tournament I'm most likely to sign up for is the World TV Mondays, because it is at a reasonable time for Europe. And then the tournament that always plays in the evenings now has a lower bracket, which is just even more time investment. I don't like it at all, because it's even more waiting, etc., which I'll get into later, as I said before. And usually in these tournaments, this is one without Clem, but usually there's like a Clem, a Max Specs, a Hero, and some other top players. So that I'm basically playing multiple hours for the chance of making money, because I'll have to play some players that I will most likely beat, and then I end up in this round, and let's say I have the seed of like a Gerald, then I play a Gumiho, or some Korean. So I have a chance of beating them. That's maybe 2 hours into the tournament, or one hour into the tournament. And then here I have to win another match in order to get the $50. And then most of the time I will end up losing to whoever awaits me in the semifinals if I make it there. So I basically invest 2 to 3 hours for the chance of making $50, which is not great, because a lot of the times, as you can see here, there's a lot of pro players like Cure who ends up investing 2 hours and then he gets nothing for it. And if I was like, this is also not the best form of practice, because I could just ask someone for custom games and then play 5 games against them. And in that time, I could play against multiple different players and play maybe 15 games of practice, which would help me with my skill level more. And it also wouldn't be streamed, so other people couldn't use it as a reference for later on. So that is not really an argument for it either. So yeah, it's basically, I invest hours of my time for a chance of making a little bit of money. Most of the time I will end up losing here. Most of the time I'll end up losing quarterfinals or semifinals. I played a lot of these online tournaments, and almost always when I signed up, I ended up in the semifinals more often than in the quarterfinals, and sometimes, but most of the time it would end in these two. Sometimes I would get to the finals, and that's fine and all. But yeah, that is the first thing. It's basically a lot of time investment, and then I'll go over some other tournaments, because Ward is always so kind to invite me to these tournaments. But even in these tournaments that are slightly bigger, you do invest some time and then you get some money. I think this is one of the best events where I almost said yes, but for different reasons I also said no. So in this case, you played 2 best of 5, so that's 2 hours for $25. That's not too bad, especially if you win an extra series, and then you get 50 for like 3 hours, let's say, and then you get 50 for another series 1. So then for 4 hours you get $100, and then you're looking at an actual salary that looks like a normal job. But in order to get there, you need to beat a bunch of good players, right? And then here I was invited as well, for example. And here you just play like this. This one is crazy. You play a round robin. So you play 5 different matches, and for example, Harrison ends up with $0. Solar ends up with 25. I mean, these are, most tournaments are, they're just, if you take a look at it from how much do I make per hour, it's not a very good wage, especially because a lot of times if I play these tournaments, the wage can be $0, and that doesn't feel very nice. My second point is that I personally dislike ZVP right now. It is simply not fun. I can make an entire video about ZVP, but it is just a very frustrating matchup. And the issue is that these tournaments have like, I don't know, 60%. It's probably more than 60%, but I'm saying it on the safe side. There's a lot of Protosses. If I sign up to one of these events, chances are I will just have to play ZVPs. I do not enjoy ZVP right now. So that in itself is an extra factor that plays into it. So I sign up to the tournament now. I have to play a matchup that I don't really enjoy for the chance of making a little bit of money. So it's a time investment, plus I would have to play against a Protoss. And then the next reason is that for the past 2 years, I think it is almost impossible for me to beat Clem unless I have like if I can prepare, if I have a month to prepare for a series against Clem, maybe I can come up with some things. But the way ZVT works right now is he can play the opener, he can tell me the opener, and I can't beat him because there's openers that you can play against anything, and you're safe against everything, and you have to outplay the Terran. And that is just not very, very likely for me. Even if I go fully blind counter and I specifically expect one certain opener, and I try to blind counter that as much as possible, I might get a small lead, but that's not enough to beat Clem. And I think realistically for me, there is not the biggest chance of winning the tournament, which also makes me not want to sign up because why am I playing a tournament if I don't think I'm going to win it? Chances that he gets knocked out by someone else is basically zero because he's on the other side of the bracket from max specs. And then if I want to win the tournament, I'll have to go through Clem because yeah, it's impossible for me not to get Clem. And even just Clem existing for me is a hit for my motivation because if I'm hitting him in any tournament, it is annoying. The kind of cool thing about the bigger events is that there's a lot of other top players that can eliminate him if he's on the other side of the tournament, and that's nice for me. But yeah, TVZ is just so difficult to upset someone that is just mechanically better than you. And he plays in all of these cups that I would play in as well. So yeah, basically the chance at winning the $200 is practically zero. And that is not the case for if anyone else. Like my chances at beating Cyril are much higher than beating Clem. My chances at beating MaxPix are like way, way, way higher than beating Clem. Even though I lose against MaxPix most of the time I play in these tournaments as well. So yeah, that is another deterrent for me. Then another couple of extra reasons is that if you look at these tournaments, what happens most of the time is you play one or two players that are severely worse than you, and then you play a player that is usually quite a bit worse than you, so you most of the time win, and then you play one series where you get a somewhat equally skilled opponent. And then that match can be fun, but that's like the only one that usually ends up being fun, and it's the only one that ends up mattering. I went over it a little bit earlier. It's just a lot of time investment, but it's also time that is not spent in the most fun way possible. It is a little bit boring to play if you know you're gonna win, and it's boring to play if you know you're gonna lose as well. So that's specifically against Clem. Even though I try to always go in with a positive mindset, it's not that easy to always remain in that positive mindset. And then on top of it, you have to do a lot of waiting just for opponents where you have to have the StarCraft open and you need to be somewhat readily available. So I can't just play ladder games. I think that is not a mannered way of playing these online cups, because I sometimes also had that where I play the cups and then I'm done with my round and the other guy's in the ladder game and I have to wait for him then once extra. I think that is not cool at all. So I don't want to do that myself as well. So I end up just waiting a lot in these cups as well. So yeah, it's a lot of time investment. The time is not spent in the most fun way possible for very little that I get back from that. So that those are the main things, the main reasons why I don't like playing in these cups. If you take all of those combined, I think it's very reasonable for me not to sign up. So these past reasons are, I think, the more objective reasons that I think everybody can understand, and that is probably hold true for most other pro gamers. But then there's a couple of extra reasons where, for me, subjectively, I just really don't like these online tournaments. Number one in this case is that I am a very preparation-based player. My biggest strength in StarCraft is probably analyzing what I can do in order to get ahead. So analyzing what my opponents like to do and what I like to do in response, and then trying to figure out either how I can get a free win or how I can get ahead when the time comes in a bigger event, right? These are some of my biggest strengths, and what I do not want to do is use that strength in these weekly cups, because if I see something that would be good against a certain opponent, I want to save that for when the time comes and it actually matters. So I end up going into these cups, and whenever I play against an opponent that is on a high level, I will purposefully not use whatever I think is good against that opponent. I will do something else. And then what comes on top of it is that I try to hide all of the stuff that I think is just generally good, because I would try to use that in real events as well, or even anything that even has the chance of me um, doing it in a real event. So I end up just playing very generic. I try to do things that I usually wouldn't do. So I end up playing way worse. Like during the games, for example, I started off playing against a Terran. I would think, how would I never send my overlords? And then either I send my first overlord straight always, or I go just a random direction where I usually wouldn't go in a real event. And that is so these tournaments don't hurt my overall tournament performance for the actual events. So usually that means that I'm basically playing with practice weights on, and I can't show my biggest strength, and that also makes it less fun for me and more frustrating for me, because sometimes I already know, okay, against X player I have two safe strategies that could beat them 100%, but I can't use them. So that is a very frustrating thing to do. So I would rather not play at all than playing something that I think shouldn't work, or I just play generic normal standard, which is not my biggest strength either. So what ended up happening is that uh, I would have even worse results than usual, and those can also loop, even though I logically know that this result shouldn't mean much since I actively didn't try. That this hurts my confidence, and confidence is a key factor in StarCraft performance, especially for me. I'm a very confidence-based player. I think a lot of players are, but this type of stuff actually hurts my confidence, and it actively hurts my performance in the real events. So for me, I decided that I just wouldn't play the online tournaments. The only reason I did play in the weeklies is because they gave out points, and the way I played those tournaments was just I tried to play generic standard. I ended up getting, I mean, I made a lot of money from these caps, and I gained a lot of points from these caps. But yeah, I still didn't enjoy those necessarily, right? Um, and I also take the losses to heart. Like generally, every single time I sign up for one of these events, I end up losing. I feel bad for at least an hour. Most of the time, these events were in the evening. So I would have a harder time falling asleep, because you guys probably all know that feeling. You go to bed, you feel bad about something. In retrospect, something that happened during the day, or even worse, right before you went to bed. And then you feel bad about it. And then I don't only feel bad afterwards, but I also feel bad while I'm in bed. My sleep ends up getting worse. I feel even worse. So I made many, many, many negative connotations with these caps. An extra connotation that is, I mean, once again, that one is just for me, is that um, my mom used to have a dog, and I used to watch him every evening, and I used to play with him in the garden every single evening. But then when I had to play the cups, or at least I felt forced to play the cups, because I always went super, super even with Showtime, like legit every single year. So any of these points might have made the difference. So I couldn't realistically justify myself not playing in these cups. I end up opening the door, and it was either always the dog in front of the door waiting for me, or, and that one hurt even more, is I see he brought a toy upstairs in front of my room, probably was waiting there for me to come out, because I usually always would. I would always have the same, like I would always stream in the afternoons, and then the moment I'm done streaming, he would either hear it, come upstairs already with a toy, and then we would go outside to play. But yeah, I couldn't do that during the Monday, so that's an extra negative connotation I made with these cups. I just hate the cups. I hate them, and that's very subjective to me. So that's a reason why I don't play in these cups. It's just not fun to play in something where you invest a lot of time into. You don't have a good time. You don't gain that much money for it. Like I would make more money if I was cleaning toilets at McDonald's than if I'm signing up to these cups on average. And then on top of that, um, I just feel bad afterwards as well, for multiple different reasons. Sometimes even bad while playing. Like it's not that fun playing and not trying, but it goes against my principles to go in there and then try to blind counter my opponents, and I can't use it anymore in the real tournaments, right? Like that also doesn't really make sense to me. So that goes against what I stand for as well. And then yeah, I just personally hate playing in them, and that's why I never played in them unless they gave out points, in which case I just tried to play generic normal standard games. But even while I was playing in them, I didn't enjoy. Now, I am personally not 100% convinced that all of these weekly cups and the smaller online tournaments are super good for the scene in itself. I'm not saying they're bad or anything, but I'm not convinced that they're that good, because we have a game that can already feel quite stale since we don't have a lot of updates for it. We don't have new maps. Like we get new maps twice a year, something like that. And then seeing the exact same matches being played at the same time every single week can feel like a slog, and it will, I think, also deter some viewers. I'm sure there's a lot of people that love it and that like it, so the positive might outweigh the negative here. But I definitely do or have seen people that are a little bit bored, and they say, okay, we've seen Clem versus Max Specs 20,000 times now. And one thing that I think also makes whenever Clem and Max Specs end up playing in a important event, like for example they played in the grand finals of the Lulu Cup against each other, makes that feel a little bit less special. Like for me personally, Max Specs versus Cyril was super hype, which was the lower bracket final, and then Max Specs ended up beating Cyril, and he played against Clem in the grand finals. And the storyline was quite nice because Max Specs hasn't won a bigger international event since I think the Pigsty, his Pigsty win, and he's now supposed to be even better than he used to be. But it was just Max Specs versus Clem, and I don't think these two players necessarily save too many strategies for each other. They just try to beat each other in every single one of these cups. I mean, they play against each other all the time. So yeah, it just feels a bit less special. When I was watching it, I was casting it as well, and it didn't feel quite as special as, let's say, as Cyril going up against Max Pix or Cyril against the Clem. So I actually think that Cyril not signing up for these events, Cyril Amaru as well, makes when they end up signing up for the events feel more special and makes these important events feel more important. I think if Cyril played in all of these events, it would actually be a little bit worse for the scene than if he doesn't. That's just my personal opinion. I think there are some other tournaments that are really really good for the scene. So I just want to also name some examples where I think they're that are super nice or that feel nice to me. I mean, all of this is subjective view and my own opinion. I loved WTL. WTL was honestly one of my favorites to play in. Players would try hard because they wouldn't just play for themselves but also for their team. It was great for the teams themselves, because then, I mean, StarCraft is a 1v1 sport, so the team is named exactly once, which is at the start of the introduction. Sometimes it isn't, but I think team events are super exciting. It was also a ton of content throughout multiple weeks, ending up in a very exciting playoffs always. So WTL, I definitely miss it. I know it's harder to do now because ever since EWC, a lot of players, there's like single player teams, so that makes running a team circuit a little bit harder. But I think it was very cool for the teams as well. I know on the Shopify Twitter, we always had something to tweet about every single weekend. And we had an exciting match, and I know all of us really try hard it, and it felt special. So WTL, for example, was super cool. I think the Big Brain Bows that Rotterdam is running every Friday is also is a very cool event, because you don't always see the same players. You get to see sometimes a Sarah, sometimes a Rainer. You can get to see players that usually you wouldn't see play a best of 5 ever. So you get to see community members or slightly weaker players that don't usually make it into the grand finals of weekly tournaments, and you can also see storylines develop there. It's really cool to watch this event. Just for example, from last week, we've had in the very first round, there was one of my Patreon subscribers against an opponent, and he really tried hard to prepare for that event, and the match ended up being super cool. And you can feel that these people are really trying hard. It's important for them, and it's not the same players always. And I think that one was a very watchable series as well. That was super, not just watchable, it was enjoyable to watch. It was a great watch. So I think Big Brain Bout is a different type of event that is also great. I also like the bigger events more than the smaller online tournaments. So for example, the Chinese events, Masters Colosseum, Liu Cup, those were very exciting because those also had some form of preparation, at least some time where they had to prepare. And it attracted all the players, and even though they It was being held throughout multiple weeks. It was a very fun watch. There were some storylines there. You also get to see all the other players play in multiple matches, and it was. I think those events are more fun to watch for me personally than just the weeklies. And then it's all the special events. So, for example, Terminus 2v2 circuit is fantastic. I mean, I know all of the pro gamers are having such a great time playing 2v2. I also personally play in all the 2v2 tournaments that I can play at because it's just you learn something new every single time. The meta develops a bit. Um, you know, banned feeding at the very start, which makes it so much more enjoyable. So, yeah, I love the 2v2 circuit. I think that one is great for the scene. I think Archon tournaments, I loved playing Archon tournaments. Like that type of stuff is super fun. You will get to see all the pro gamers stream it. You can see how they're enjoying their time as well, and how you can theory craft, how you it just feels a little bit more fresh. These 2v2 tournaments, Archon tournaments, even reverse race tournaments, those might not attract the biggest viewership, but they're fun because you get to play always the race of your opponent. So then you end up saying, hey, see, your race is the easier one, or see, no, Protoss is not that easy to play after all. Let's say I'm playing against Showtime and his Zerg beats my Protoss or something, and then you can have fun storylines there, and it's just something a bit different. The Wardy Casters Invitational, or whatever it was called, was also super, super fun, where they all drafted their own teams. I mean, all of that stuff is just a different feeling, and it was a breath of fresh air, which I think wouldn't hurt. Now, once again, I want to reiterate that I don't say weekly cups by themselves are bad for the scene or anything like that. In fact, I want to thank anyone that puts in time and effort into creating content for not only the casters, but also the players and the viewers, of course. We don't have that much right now in StarCraft, so anything extra is very much so appreciated. And I also fully understand that these types of tournaments are good for the different casters that, I mean, right now we have a split between Wardy casters' own tournament plus all the other language casters, and then Rotterdam has basically his tournament with all the other extra casters, and then Pick has his own tournament, etc. And I understand that this is good also for their channels, and thus also for the scene, because growth, but not necessarily growth, but keeping the viewer numbers up for the different content creators definitely helps the scene big time. But I simply dislike the weekly tournaments for all of the reasons previously stated. Myself personally, this is very subjective. I'm not saying weekly tournaments are bad. Once again, before anybody is misquoting me, I'm just saying I personally don't like them as much, and I also find it a bit boring over time. Now, I of course am coming here explaining all my frustrations without really solutions so far, so I'm not being the most constructive person here. So I'm gonna try to do a little bit here at this point within the last segment of this video. I personally would love to see different events instead of the exact same every single week. But I have never run a tournament myself. And I'd imagine if people put less money in their online cups right now and then they pool them together for bigger events, that would need to be a collaboration between multiple different casters. And then I would imagine it's worse for the casters themselves, because then they would have to share that product if such a thing is even possible. So I'm not sure how good that would be for the different channels. And then also there would be less watch time overall, of course. Let's say they only do one weekly cup where all of the regions play. If you want on a Monday, then they would have to share their viewership if they all try to cast the weekly cups, and then all the extra money can go into a bigger project, and then they would need to share that as well. And it would probably be worse, especially for the streamers themselves. So I don't have a good option. I mean, if we had sufficient funding, then I could tell you a couple of tournament ideas that I think would be fun to run, as I've been doing already where I went over what I thought was fun. But yeah, it's simply also a question of money, and sadly right now we don't have that much of money, or we don't have those insane viewer accounts that you can just yourself, or the casters or any other, or any of the streamers could run their own events without financial downsides, right? So yeah, it's difficult for me to be very constructive here, aside from saying what type of tournaments I like personally, because that is also super subjective. Since I'm not into all of the logistics of running tournaments, and I don't know how uh, the viewership would develop if you do it differently. Either way, I would Love to hear from you guys what type of tournaments you guys like watching the most in the comments below. I think this would be very interesting for me personally because I'm sure a lot of you guys love watching the Monday night on a Rotterdam stream, tuning in for a cheeky Clam versus Max Specs in the grand finals. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of you there, and if you are one of those and you're saying, man, I love that way more than a random 2v2 tournament or the bigger cups, I would rather have more small cups than fewer bigger cups, then please also let me know in the comments because this is obviously subjective, but I am not the entire viewership. I am actually a one-off since I'm a player myself in this case. So I am in the minority here, so that's why I would love to hear from you guys. One other area where I believe improvements could be made without any extra cash or anything like that would be that you make Zerg more enjoyable to play, especially in ZVP. I think right now you will see a lot of PvP and PvP mainly in the tournaments, and it is also less fun to watch if you're a Zerg viewer or honestly anyone because there's simply less matchup diversity every single time in these tournaments. Dark sometimes gets to the round of 4, sometimes he gets to the final. Most of the time, Hero, Max Specs, and Clem win it, and most of the time in the like whenever Dark doesn't participate in it, no Zerg makes it into the round of 4. There's now $25 that are being given out for the best performing Zerg in the Rotterdam Cup, which I think speaks for itself already. And the reason a lot of Zergs are not playing as much right now is, A, as I said, the motivation because of all the extra tournaments, but we would be playing if our race was very fun to play. Trust me, like if ZVP was more fun to play, since all we play against is Protoss right now. Like legit, if I open up the ladder, 70% of my games will be against Protoss. And it is an issue that this matchup is not fun to play on a high level. Please don't misquote me there as well. I think ZVP is actually the best for Zerg. It has been on a lower level since the Nidus was broken. Like legitimately, it has gotten better for Zerg because now you have the Gigaspore, the interceptors, like you can actually counter carriers now with corruptors, which is great even if you have bad micro, poor micro. But you hear a lot of the Zergs, like if I talk to any Zerg out there, they are frustrated about ZVP. Any Zerg at a pro level is frustrated. And then the viewers will also hear the complaints of the pro gamers, and then they will have the confirmation bias, the same as when the Protoss was doing poorly. Then everybody in Diamond was like, okay, but my race sucks, and now all the Zergs are up, but then my race sucks. And I think that it would help a lot if we make Zerg at the very least. You don't need to buff it, but make it more enjoyable to play because right now ZVP is not fun, and most of the games that we have are simply against Protoss. That will lead to less Zerg participation and thus also less variety in these tournaments themselves, and thus also less fun for the viewership to watch, right? So if you make Zerg more fun to play, more enjoyable, very least against Protoss, um, which I think the other matchups are fine, but it's just really not that fun to play against Protoss on a high level, once again. I think it would help. Specifically, you still are not going to get Cyril to sign up to these events, which as I said before, I think is good for the scene actually. But you might get any laser to sign up, or you might get a rare Lambo sighting in one of these online events, and I think that already would go a way to making these maybe more enjoyable for the viewers. And before I come to my closing thoughts, I just want to say real quick that instead of playing all of these cups, I put a lot of my time into creating a Patreon, my Zerg Academy. This is where I try to get every single Zerg player to have a better time on the ladder because I know a lot of Zergs are very frustrating, and these frustrations that the pro gamers are having are also mirrored by the community. And I think Zerg right now is actually quite good at a lower level, or at the very least better than it was previously. And I want to teach all of you guys what I have learned, and I try to do that in my Zerg Academy. So if you want to check that out, if you're a Zerg that is frustrated as well, maybe give that one a try. I will talk about all the frustrations of lower level Zerg play in an extra video. I have a massive video prepared for that, which will probably drop in about half a month from now, where I'm also running an experiment with my Zerg Academy. But yeah, if you want to be part of that experiment, or it's actually not part of that experiment, but if you also want to try that out, make sure to check out my Patreon. I'll leave it in the description. And without further ado, I just want to come to my closing thoughts. So the reason I'm off ALIGULAC is not because I'm retired, it's because I'm not playing in any tournaments. The reason I'm not playing in any tournaments is because there are no tournaments that I like to play in. This is mainly the reason for that is simply the lack of tournaments, but also because I don't like online tournaments. Most online tournaments I don't like for all of the reasons that I previously have stated. But there are some tournaments that I would probably play if I would actually enjoy playing ZVP a little bit more. For example, the Wardy Backers Brawl, for example, I would have played in if I enjoyed my time more. The Wardy February I wouldn't have played because they're simply money for time investment is not in a good balance to each other for me personally. So yeah, sorry if you thought I was retired. I'm not retired. You're not getting rid of me quite yet. And we'll see what the future has in store for us. I hope there's an EWC announcement personally, but I don't really know what's coming. I'm there guessing and hoping and coping with you all. And without further ado, thank you guys for watching and see you in the next video. Bye bye.